Scott, the word has just come down that the judge in the Southern District of New York has denied Jeffrey Epstein bail. That's good news. It would seem that case is moving in the right direction. How are you, Scott? Good to see you.
I'm doing very well, Jason. It's good to be with you.
We're going to be working through a little bit of a slow internet connection here, so I hope everything will be all right. But, you know, last time we were together, Scott, we were talking about Alexander Acosta, a guy who's pretty easy to hate. And, you know, I had just seen the press conference he had done the day before, during which he was talking about some of the complications involved in prosecuting a crime like this, a case like this. A lot of people felt he was making excuses. I felt he was illuminating a process that the average person doesn't really understand. He read some letters from female prosecutors. I'm speaking specifically about the non-prosecution agreement, the highly unusual non-prosecution agreement he was behind for Jeffrey Epstein in 2008. And you and I had a little bit of back and forth trying to decide if this guy was doing the right thing or not. We were very surprised that he resigned the next day, and now you've uncovered a lot more information about cases that Alexander Acosta was involved in. What is it that you have to share with us today, Scott? It's quite interesting.
Well, I'm going to be a little bit cryptic because some of this is being actively exercised and pursued in the halls of Washington and courts and with people that you and I know, and we're not going to give the bad guys any tip off to how these things have been categorized or locked and loaded. So I'll talk about it as much as I can. But first of all, let's set the foundation for Acosta. In my book, if we judge him on what he's done with the Epstein case and what that originally entailed, it comes to a very ugly calculation, because if we look at what the logic and the rationale has been for that decision to give Epstein a very, 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 I mean, obscenely lenient and I mean, really just a get out of jail card.
Unprecedented.
It becomes the things that unprecedented and revolutionary, Jason. This is the sort of things that cause people to riot in the streets and upset revolutions in countries and go absolutely apoplectic. This really is when their little girls are recruited and raped and treated like whores in the red light district, which is what he did. And granted, it was at 35,000 feet, and granted, it was with serial whoremongers like Bill Clinton and other rich degenerates, rich and powerful degenerates, which probably makes them far worse. To see Acosta giving this kind of a deal, and none of the girls or the victims who really brought this out originally, who needed to become whole, who needed healing, who needed some sort of closure, they were all denied that. So what it translates into is that the justice system in the United States and the courts and the laws regarding this sort of behavior mean nothing. They're worthless. They're shadows, because it's not about justice and righteousness and the making whole the victims. It's not about that or them. It's about secret deals, secret intelligence, getting notches on your belt, trying to say, well, we couldn't win otherwise, so we had to take this deal, or we had to prosecute this way instead of that way. To hell with all of that. The entire justice system and the court calculation and all of the analytical jargon that they use is worthless garbage. At the heart of the emotion and the spirit of this matter is a pedophile who is preying on little young girls for the purposes of political power and intelligence gathering, most likely through Mossad, most likely through CIA, and honey trap designs. And Acosta was responsible solely for the federal portion and the federal totality of this. And let's never forget, this is a federal crime because it's international trafficking of children for sexual exploitation. The military kill people for doing this regularly on special operations.
Wow.
But it's a federal crime, and it also entails the federal rights of these kids. They have federal civil rights, constitutional rights to be free of life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, and to be protected and free from exploitation. So their civil rights were violated under 18 U.S.C. 242. They have a right to sue him under 42 U.S.C. 1983 and 84 and 85. But what makes it odious is that Acosta was the attorney in charge of the whole civil rights division ever since he came into the Bush administration. So everything about this man is hypocrisy when you just look at the Epstein case. Now, that being said, I will lead into the next portion of this.
Wait, Scott, let me just ask you real quick. You don't think there's any validity at all to some of the things that Acosta said, even the letters he read from female prosecutors who were concerned that prosecuting a case like this against someone so wealthy with so many resources, I mean, I hear what you're saying. The right thing to do was to prosecute him, but you yourself personally experienced going into court and relying on the laws and what's right and what's true can sometimes result in it turning out not the way you expect, as it did in your case.
You're right. You're right. There is a political gamesmanship and risk calculation variables. They go through an entire calculus of these things. But on this sort of an emotional case, on this sort of here's an opportunity to bring up all of the little girls with braces and pigtails and let them stand and point at this man and say with an emotional passion and fury, like the little gymnast girls that were sexually molested by that,
the doctor,
that coach, let them say to Epstein, he did this, and Bill Clinton did this, and Dershowitz did that, if he did anything, and this person did this, and that. These girls don't care about political power or even money. They care about their innocence and their woundedness, and they were essentially preyed upon because they came from vulnerable positions, vulnerable backgrounds, broken families. They were hurting. They were, some of them they've talked about being in the LGBT or whatever kind of confused state of mind. But these are kids nonetheless that have been preyed upon by a professional child sexual exploiting recruitment operation. That's why it does have intelligence dimensions to it. So there is a time to go charging, like in the days of old when you had two knights on two horses charging each other with the lances, and one guy knocked off and one guy was victorious. And this was the opportunity in the courts of law for every young woman to stand up and to reclaim her innocence, her dignity as best she could. It's the only thing that would make them whole. And they were denied that, and they were denied it for political advantage, intelligence manipulation, absolute corruption of the courts. And I'm not trying to sound romantically philosophical and John Adams-like, but this is exactly what the courts were created for, is to have these emotional Shakespearean dramas, to have these monsters brought up in chains and put on front for the world to see, and to say what you've done to these women is going to be drawn out and exposed and punished, and we're going to encourage by this example other women and other prosecution of similar monsters like you, and that's what was denied by Acosta. And he's about as ugly as a monster too when you look at him in that photograph. But Acosta's role in this is despicable, and his despicability goes into another dimension when we talk about the next segment of his corrupt legal political career, and that was Rene Alexander Acosta. When he was in Florida as I think it was the one of the federal attorneys, or the federal
U.S. attorney for the Southern
U.S.
District.
attorney for the Southern District of Florida. Yes, so he was the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida who prosecuted, along with Kevin Downing and Kevin O'Connor, prosecuted Brad Birkenfeld for the original Union Bank of Switzerland bank accounts that he brought over to the United States Department of Justice, pleading for them to give him a subpoena so he could testify against Robert Wolf, chairman of the Americas, who is now Obama's library, one of his presidential library donors, bundlers, managers.
Ooh.
So Brad could testify against Abdullah Aziz, a terrorist financier. So he could testify against Igor Alenikov, a major Russian financier, and others. And all of that was denied Brad because Rene Alexander Acosta lured Brad Birkenfeld, along with the Senate under Levin and McCain, to testify about this matter. But then Acosta sealed that testimony so that Brad couldn't use it in his defense against the case that Alexander Acosta brought against Brad, and threw him in jail, and then took the 19,000 bank accounts and conspired with Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer and Loretta Lynch and Tim Geithner to basically confiscate, squirrel away, use for black operations, use for Saudi, Qatari operations, which included Libya, Syria, and the continuing domino effect of terrorist mercenary utilization operations.
Scott, let me slow you down a second.
ISIS, Al Qaeda, these sort of things.
Let me slow you down a second, because that's kind of complicated. So
yeah.
For people who were listening and maybe didn't catch all of that, so Brad Birkenfeld, the UBS banker who you met when you were wrongly imprisoned, and he gave you all this information that basically contributed to your creation of the book Shell Game, which we should mention people can purchase from shellgamewhistleblower.com. That's Scott's book all about the terrorist financing links between the Union Bank of Switzerland, our clandestine agencies, contractors to the government like Booz Allen Hamilton, all of the conversations you had with Brad Birkenfeld. So let's break this down again as if I didn't understand a word that you just said. So Brad Birkenfeld, he has all this evidence about UBS doing illegal money transfers, transactions between terrorists, and tell us again exactly what it is that Acosta did, because it sounds bad.
Well, what happened, we'll go through a little bit of the prologue first. Brad Birkenfeld was a American Union Bank of Switzerland Swiss banker. Before that, he was at Deutsche Bank. He was also at Credit Suisse, so he'd worked in banking for a while. And he also was in Bern, Switzerland, and that's where he was originally gathering a lot of his banking material, banking accounts. They're all secret and stuff, and you have to be very careful in Switzerland. And what Brad had done, he was targeted essentially by the CIA, and Edward Snowden was part of that surveillance operation. And Edward Snowden targeted Brad in Bern. They got him into a DUI situation. He was then thrown in a Swiss jail cell, and the next day a CIA agent went in and flashed a CIA badge and got Brad out of jail and tried to turn him into an asset. Brad quickly recognized and was a little bit fearful of his safety, and he fled, and he came over to the United States and tried to dump all of this on the Department of Justice.
Dump all of what?
Kevin
the evidence,
O'Connor
the evidence that he had? He wanted to relieve himself of the evidence?
Well, the evidence he had. He wanted to turn this over for the American people. He wanted to turn it over because there's a lot of American tax avoiding, operations and people from Hollywood. You had, there's a lot of them. I mean, Kevin Costner was mentioned, George Clooney was mentioned. Wow. Some of the highest and wealthiest Hollywood types, and also international people. So you had Russians in there, you had Saudis, you had Qataris, you had Emiratis, you had all the Gulf countries. And Brad had brought all of that over to the Department of Justice to try and dump it. They pushed him out. They called him a tipster. They said, we don't want anything to do with this. He then went to the, and see, he was tenacious. And that's what they didn't like, because he immediately went to the IRS. They said no. He went to the SEC. They said no. Then he went to the Senate, and they said yes. And what's also interesting is fraudulent letters from friends of Brad had been sent to UBS exposing what he was doing. So that meant the CIA and the Department of Justice were trying to have him arrested or killed for what he did. Wow. Because no one knew this except the Department of Justice and the CIA. He was absolutely secret about this. He didn't tell anybody. He left in the middle of the night, came over to the United States, and instantly thought he was going to be embraced and welcomed and put into a high-level, protective custody, and he wasn't. So he had a fight, and he was bizarre. And I write about this in Shell Game, the whole thing that they did to him, the CIA and the Department of Justice. And he gets in, he testifies to the Senate, he gives all of this to the Levin-Kane committee, and Obama was on that committee at the time, actually, when Brad originally testified. This is over a few years process.
As a senator, Obama was on the committee.
When he got out, yes, yeah, just before he was running for office. So this drew out, and eventually they sealed everything. And then they started investigating him, and they started discovering what he knew and what he had. To make a long story short, in 2009 is when they prosecuted him and said, we're prosecuting you for bank fraud or something. And he said, what are you talking about? I gave you all of this information. And the FBI was involved with this too. The FBI Counterterrorism Office had tried to say he failed to report certain things, and he said, no, it's right here in the transcripts. And then they had to correct that, but then they sealed and they fixed their original, gaps and failures. And then they came at him a second time, and he said, "What are you talking about? I already gave you this." And they said, "No, no, no, no. That's all sealed. You can't use it. You have no defense. We're going to prosecute you." And his lawyer, who's probably a sellout too, said, "Yeah, take a." And the lawyer took a plea deal. At court, said guilty, we're taking a plea deal. Brad fired him and then tried to fight his way out, and then ended up having to take a plea deal. And they threw him in jail. And that's where I met him, and he was mad as a hornet. He couldn't believe it. And I said, after 6 months, he and I sat down and went over all this stuff, and I said, "You're exactly the guy who I was looking for. This is what I was doing at U.S. Central Command. I was tracking all the money supplies. Saudi Arabia, Qatari, all the countries that were in U.S. CENTCOM's area of operations. You have it all." And he said they didn't want us to get together, and yet here we are in the same jail and the same barracks talking about all this stuff. And if it had happened outside of jail, it would have been in a skiff and classified, and nobody would hear about this. Nobody would know this, Jason, unless it had happened the way it did. And that's God, that's white hats, that's divine intervention. That's the best of luck for the American people, because now they can see very clearly that the Union Bank of Switzerland bank accounts that Brad bought, over 19,000 of them, were hid and stolen by Hillary Clinton, redirected by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, redirected by the law firm Covington and Burling, Stuart Eisenstadt. Of course, Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer worked for Covington and Burling before they joined the Justice Department. Then they returned afterwards. Then Covington and Burling sends a lawyer to represent Michael Flynn, Robert Kellner. So Covington and Burling is like the big octopus, the deep state law firm that's all over this stuff. And they are the ones that Sidney Powell is going to blow up from the inside like a M1000 firecracker in the bowels of this monster, because she's got all of this information, and it's now coming out. And Acosta was a big part of this. And of course, the Trump administration have all of this information, so they have a very clear picture of what Acosta did to Brad Birkenfeld, to the Union Bank of Switzerland case. It was not about $780 million and deferred prosecutions and fines. No, all of that is a cover story. This is about hiding the money of the deep state so that Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation and Obama and Eric Holder and Covington and Burling could all take and steal this money, extort people, and they did that. They regularly called, account holders and said, you have to give us half the money in this bank account, or else we're going to take it all. So all of that is in the 33,000 emails that Hillary was talking about. All of that has been captured by NSA and other intelligence sweeps, and I think all of it is going to be coming out in the next year as Trump quickens the prosecution of these people. And Epstein is an example of an intelligence operative being prosecuted through child pornography. That's going to happen to other people, I think. And Acosta has been let go and fired, not because he's as ugly as a dog's butt, but because he has the moral character of exactly what I just described. Well, and he's responsible for criminal action by hiding terrorist financing money. That's the biggest thing. What Acosta did is he guaranteed people like me, the military operatives who work with this, would not get all of this intelligence and be able to stop the wars. And for that, Acosta needs to be charged with misprision of a felony, misprision of treason, as many others do in the UBS case.
It's still a little bit confusing, Scott, because I think people I know I don't fully understand why, if they were trying to prosecute Brad Birkenfeld, did they ultimately give him $104 million? It seems like they're paying him off or something. I mean, it's a
well,
weird...
they did that after he met me. They did that after he met me.
So their original plan
of... we submitted the report Shell Game, they were never going to pay him anything.
So their original plan to stick him in jail and have him...
and they couldn't...
have him go away, that original plan failed, and then this $104 million payoff was some sort of a plan B. And of course, Shell Game is the book in which you detail all of this stuff.
Well, they stopped... Yeah, they had never planned on me and Brad getting together. They didn't plan for the White Hats at Fort Belvoir. They didn't plan for the White Hats at Fort Meade. They didn't plan for the White Hats at Fort McNair, all of whom knew me, and the White Hats at SOCOM and JMISC and the State Department, all of whom knew me. I had a lot of friends and people that I never go into it because I never want to reveal anybody, but I had a lot of people talking about this. I didn't realize it was going to go the way it did. You know, I'm sort of a bull in a china shop. I don't pay attention to the little details. I just gore and charge ahead. And when I did, they kind of threw a lasso around me and pulled me into this jail. But the jail they were supposed to send me to was California. The bus was turned around in Pennsylvania, Jason, and I was redirected miraculously to Pennsylvania. So they didn't plan on me going to Pennsylvania. They thought I was going to California. Here I get turned around and sent to Pennsylvania.
And you drove from Florida to Pennsylvania on a prison bus, Scott?
Everything.
You drove from Florida to Pennsylvania on a prison bus?
No. I drove to Oklahoma from Florida. Oklahoma to from Florida to Oklahoma, and let me tell you, that is a horrible drive. It's one of the places on Dante's poetic description of hell in the middle of winter, and they were supposed to bus me to California. They do this to torture people. They do this to break them down. That's why I thought this was all an operation. I thought this is to toughen me up. This is part of SEER training. This is search, evasion, rescue, resistance, and escape. I'm not going to escape because I got FBI guys with shotguns, but I'm on this bus eating bologna sandwiches and old apples for a purpose. Okay. Any day I was expecting military, and I know it's laughable because people go, "You got to be kidding." When you're in the military, when you're given a TSSCI, when you're told things, you expect any day to be carjacked or anything like that, because they do that to test you. You're entrusted with not only intelligence, but you're entrusted to go and do things with that intelligence. So any day I thought, okay, this has got to be a test. This has got to be, and it in a sense it was, but in a sense it wasn't.
TSSCI. So they shipped me to Oklahoma. What is TSSCI, Scott? Sorry about the delay. What is TSSCI? Top secret.
Top secret, sensitive, compartmentalized information. It's the top clearance that you can get.
Got it. So the whole time you're on the bus, you've told us before, you're thinking
from Oklahoma to Pennsylvania.
You're thinking it's a test, that this is, part of your ascension to the next level. You're getting into all this stuff. and instead you're stuck in jail. So, okay, the thing that remains somewhat confusing is that, you know, you seem to be indicating that Michael Flynn, Donald Trump, all these guys should know about this stuff with Brad Birkenfeld and Alexander Acosta, yet we saw Donald Trump...
Well, they do know.
But we saw Donald Trump say he wanted Alexander Acosta to stay, and Alexander Acosta said, I have the president's support, and then the next day he resigned. We want Donald Trump to somehow intervene and help Michael Flynn, yet he doesn't. So what's up?
It's the kabuki theater of politics, Jason. Remember, you've got a bunch of, and I love saying this, you have a bunch of lunatic, tattooed, body-pierced, gay, transgender, homosexual, dog-raping fanatics up in Congress, up in Washington, the Antifa types, these lunatics who are trying to break down the borders, no America, no borders, absolute communist chaos. You got the four Skigsian witches of the apocalypse, Artesio Cortez and Omar and these others. You got all these wingbats out there that are desperate to impeach him, and some of the wingbacks are Republican. They've been desperate to impeach Trump. They've had 2 years of the Russia hoax. This has been the biggest forest fire of politics that we've ever seen in this country. So, you know, the smoke and the shock and awe and the flashbangs that they have been throwing at Trump and the American people since he was elected indicate to me this is serious information war. This is serious political war. This is a war for the soul of this country. They wanted a Hillary Clinton hell on earth America. God intervened. Trump is president. And I will be damned, and I think anybody else who loves the Constitution and their rights and their freedoms will be damned if they're going to allow this to be overthrown. Not because he's a perfect guy, because he's not, but he is better than anything on the Democrat ledger, period. Tulsi Gabbard's the only one that gives him a little bit of a stretch because she's anti-war, but she's also wrong in a lot of her other philosophical positions as far as I'm concerned. So Trump is the 50% plus one candidate that matches our moral, political, philosophical, religious, economic values. That's how you determine a political candidate for president, who matches your majority of values. So Trump, in doing this, he's doing kabuki theater. He's got to do information operations. He's got to do deception operations. Look, if I was advising him, one of the biggest things, and I don't trust Bolton, I think he's a draft-dodging fool and a lunatic because he's scarred in so many ways. But a component of a presidential administration is to undergo deception operations. So he's engaged in deception operations with you know, a lot of these parties, including the media. Yes, he's got to say, I love Acosta. I'd let him babysit my kids. I don't want him to go, but he really has to go because he wants to go. And he's probably saying, hey, Acosta, you see all this stuff on Shell Game? That was you. You better be prepared to give up a lot of these guys and testify in a year because otherwise you're going to be roped into this net. And, you know, that's what we have. That's the poker game, too, right? Trading cards. Okay, Acosta, as dirty as he is, but can he give up more and really go after the real bad guys? And is it worth it? I think it could be. I don't like Acosta for what he did, but I like more the fact that he could finger Eric Holder and put him in the guillotine, Lanny Brewer and put him in the guillotine, Loretta Lynch and put her in the guillotine because she was the one who made this deal with UBS, working with Hillary Clinton and Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer. So Acosta can finger Loretta Lynch, Eric Holder, Lanny Brewer, Hillary Clinton, Tim Geithner, as well as Stuart Eisenstadt, Roger Zakheim, who is the son of my boss, Dov Zakheim. So Booz Allen Hamilton, Covington and Burling are linked by Dov Zakheim and Roger Zakheim, and Scott Bennett is the white boy in the middle of the Oreo cookie. So all of this stuff can start coming out with Acosta fingering a lot to people.
But why would he do that? Why should we believe that Acosta? Why do we believe that Acosta will do that? It seems like he
to save his butt. Otherwise, he could be prosecuted for terrorist financing and contributing to aiding and abetting terrorists, hiding money. He hid 19,000 bank accounts. He stole 19,000 bank accounts, hundreds of millions of dollars, redirected the money to private accounts, including ones from the Clinton Foundation, redirected that money from donors to terrorism, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates. I mean, I've got lists of them here. You've got Oman, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan. I mean, the length of all of the Saudi and the Wahhabi royal family that use these sort of accounts for terrorist operations, because they use a variety of other money laundering instruments from nonprofits and charities and things like that, but it all is funneled to foot soldiers on the ground. And the foot soldiers on the ground go into Libya. They get, remember, this isn't just for bombs and bullets. This is bribery money. This is creating film sets in Qatar to pretend it's in Libya.
Right.
Qatar did that.
Yep.
They made a whole Hollywood film sets. They did horrific things. This is for training. This is, you know, the British commando training, the CIA training of these bad guys to chop people up.
Yeah.
That's CIA training.
We've heard about a lot of that from the Moriartys.
Really serious, ugly stuff.
Very terrible stuff. We've heard about from the Moriartys.
Yeah.
So you're mentioning some of these countries like Saudi Arabia, and that brings me back to Jeffrey Epstein. Just yesterday, or perhaps the day before, it was discovered that Jeffrey Epstein had a passport that was used multiple times in the 1980s. There's been some question about the details of this passport, but apparently an address in Saudi Arabia was, the passport contains numerous ingress and egress stamps. France, Spain, United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia in the 1980s. We've heard how there was this jockey boy scandal in the United Arab Emirates. Afghanistan, it's almost a national pastime, the rape of young boys. I should call it a cultural difference. We've heard military people say that they were disgusted by this, but they were informed that this is, the culture and that we shouldn't interfere with it. What kind of connection do we see between Saudi Arabia and Jeffrey Epstein and Acosta?
Well, it's prolific. It's just like Thailand's boy prostitution rings and the pedophiles that go there. It's regular in Saudi Arabia. They don't have the gay parades and rainbow flags and sadomasochistic leather outfits and whippings that the Freddie Mercury types in San Francisco seem to embellish themselves with. They don't have that in Saudi Arabia, but they do have that rampant boys are for pleasure and girls are for breeding. You do have the Man Love Thursday, which when I was in the military, all of the military MPs and the guards and the bases of incarceration hated working Thursdays, and it was because you had all the guards included engage in sodomite activities, sodomy, and it was to relieve the stress. It's a different world, Jason. It's Mars. These countries and these peoples and their cultures are Mars to a lot of extent, and it's usually always the Wahhabi, Salafi, Bedouin, Sunni types. It's not the Shia. It's not the Syrians. It's not the Alawite. It's not the Iranians or the Kurds or things like that. It's it's got a weird sphere. Afghanistan does this, of course. Afghanistan, that was one of the things that the Canadians were really upset about, because they witnessed, they were in holding positions. They weren't in kinetic offensive operations. So the Canadians were sort of the MPs of the MPs and the borderlines. And they saw the Afghani police, when they came into power, and the whole new military, engage in all of this horrific stuff, abducting boys, chaining them to beds, raping and pillaging. That's why you had a lot of special forces guys get in trouble because they were objecting to this. But and I wrote to Jason Shabbat, who sounds like he's in a gay parade himself, and Saxby Chambliss, And I said, this is happening. This needs to be stopped. This needs to be investigated. They did nothing, absolutely nothing. So it reminds me the pieces of garbage that we have occupying the United States Congress, and these pathetic cowards and weaklings who betray the most fundamental expectations of American citizens, and that is to protect children and to not tolerate these things in the name of, well, cultural differences. Well, we have to endure the child raping and sodomy and abduction in these countries because we want oil. We want political alliances to work against Russia, China, and Iran. Really, we lose our soul in that sort of exercise, and they camouflage and run from it in their rhetorical Fox News sound bites. But we have to immunize ourselves from that and go right to the heart of the matter and stick our finger right in Chavitz's chest and Saxby Chambliss' chest and all the others who received a lot of this material and say, you're an absolute hypocrite, coward, liar, or you're a fool, one or the other. Feinstein, she's a perfect example. Her and Bill Nelson, who worked with Donna Shalala and her nephew David Shalala to prosecute me. Bill Nelson, when I was smuggling my reports out of the prison environment, he wrote to Dianne Feinstein about me, and he put it up on his website. And I've got the copy of the letter in Shell Game. So he inadvertently, or maybe intentionally, put Dianne Feinstein's neck in the guillotine, because here is Senator Nelson communicating to Feinstein about Scott Bennett, Shell Game. How did he get this clearance? How did he get this material? All sorts of other things. Well, you know what? Let's ask Scott Bennett. Let's look at what did he report to you, Mr. Nelson? Oh, he reported Union Bank of Switzerland bank accounts that were being utilized by terrorist financiers have been given to me. I've shared them with General James Mattis at U.S. Central Command. I've shared them with General Michael Flynn, Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. I've shared them with General Ray Odierno, Secretary of the Army. I've shared them with General Martin Dempsey, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I've shared them with General Jeff Jones, Commander of U.S. Civil Affairs Psychological Operations Command. I've shared them with his Lieutenant Colonel Bauckham Folk. I've shared them with everybody, including the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees of the House and the Senate, and no one has done anything. And kids are dead. American kids are dead and wounded and maimed because they've done nothing, because the war has been allowed to continue. These weapons have continued to flourish. And that's really the biggest crime, is all of this was purposely hid. It was not ignored. It was purposely hid, and Brad was hid. And after we reported that in August of 2012, within a month, on September 11th, 2012, they paid off Brad $104 million, told him to disappear.
Same day as Benghazi.
Not mention the name Scott Bennett. And they did it on Benghazi. So the Benghazi operation was a distraction operation for the real deep state, Union Bank of Switzerland Shell Game. And they threw Brad in jail a second time to make sure he got the point.
Wow.
They put him in jail for a DUI, held him there. After I was making all this noise, they put him in jail again in December of 2012. I think it was for a DUI, and held him there. And that's when he got out of he went absolutely silent and deep. And his lawyer said that he had been in contact with people I know.
Yeah.
And he went deep.
Scott, people have been watching us for weeks. Many thousands of people see the shows that you're doing here on Crowdsource the Truth. I hope that people will go to shellgamewhistleblower.com and purchase the book so that they can read about all of these details. So let's bring this back to Jeffrey Epstein, because it's interesting to note that this press release from the Department of Justice regarding UBS entering into a deferred prosecution agreement. So this was the beginning of 2009. All the Epstein stuff was happening in 2008. First of all, what is a deferred? I think most people see this type of thing. They have no idea what they're looking at. This is part of the way that they're able to get this stuff over the plate. What is a deferred prosecution agreement? UBS paying $780 million if they're stealing or somehow earning billions seems like nothing. And what's the link to Epstein, to his non-prosecution agreement and this deferred prosecution agreement? Is there a link?
Well, the $780 million was 2% of UBS's yearly profit income. We did the calculations, and I've got it in shell game. So they charged them 2%, and it's a deferred prosecution. Is we are all agreeing to put all of this material into a vault and shut it and key it, and nobody can open it. And that's the real conspiracy.
That sounds like them paying a very small fee to. Yeah, it's UBS paying essentially a small fee to cover up their crimes and not be prosecuted for them.
Yeah. They did that, but they agreed to give 15,000 bank accounts to the Department of Justice and to the State Department. And to Covington and Burling, to remain invisible behind the great curtain of the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton State Department and Obama and Robert Wolf, Chairman of the Americas. All of them went into a secret room with 15,000 bank accounts, and that's where the real terrorism and violations of the Constitution occurred. That's where all the emails of Clinton's server, that's what generated all of this stuff. She generated and started talking about all this stuff in making deals with the Swiss, sending Chinese Uyghurs from Guantanamo Bay up into Switzerland for deployment back into Chinese areas of operations. That's why the Chinese were listening. Chinese Uyghur is a Chinese Muslim, and the Chinese are adamantly cracking down on them and putting them in internment re-education camps, and they don't like them. Because they're seen as an irritant and a source of instability to the political communist regime of China. So the Chinese Uyghur population is seen as a terrorist threat to China. So Hillary Clinton was removing them from Guantanamo Bay and sending them up to Switzerland so they would be invisibly transitioned back into East or West China operations. So, all of this stuff was going after 2009. It was before Uranium One, and it was before all the other shenanigans. They thought they were going to get away with it, right? So they had 2009 all the way up till 2016. But hey, then Hillary Clinton's going to come on board, and it's going to just continue to be hidden. So we've endured 8 years of constipation with Obama, and Trump is our enema, who is now releasing all of the backed up poison and toxins in the bowels of our body politic. So Trump is the fire hose giving us a good cleansing, and don't be surprised as all this crap and stench comes pouring out, and it doesn't smell like Teen Spirit. It smells like corruption and Clinton and typical Bill Clinton and all the other cast of conflict and criminals, Eric Holder, Landy Brewer, Covington and Burling. So you can make it up, but it's fascinating how almost comedic. It's almost like a tragic comedy or a Shakespearean play that all of this is coming together. And mind you, Julian Assange plays the key part in this because he provided the WikiLeaks cables to Brad that disclosed the Hillary Clinton State Department operations at the Counterterrorism Office, State Department Counterterrorism Office. And I told Brad when I saw the cables, I was there at the State Department Counterterrorism Office. That was where I was assigned. So I could testify to that. Julian Assange can testify to that in the WikiLeaks cables. That's why he needs to stay alive and testify about this.
Yes, let's talk some more. Let's talk some more about Assange in a moment, Scott. But so many people have come to really enjoy your unique commentary. It's a mixture of firsthand experience and firsthand testimony from things that you witnessed and evidence that you uncovered, mixed in with a very intellectual brand of extremely conservative comedy, and I've really come to appreciate it. I think it's very important for people who are watching and enjoy Scott's commentary to go to patreon.com/shellgame and sponsor Scott on Patreon. Whistleblowers like Scott really put their necks out there. Scott has been incarcerated. He has been just trashed in the mainstream, trashed by the government and the legal system. So traditional methods of earning money are often inaccessible to whistleblowers. And people like hearing this information and seeing Scott every week on Crowdsource the Truth. I hope that people will go to patreon.com/shellgame and sponsor Scott. And also don't forget to go to his webpage, shellgamewhistleblower.com, and purchase the book Shellgame so you can read more about it and learn more about it. Now, so let's talk about Assange for a moment. There was a sort of a story breaking in the alternative news this week that seemed a little bit, I don't know. To me, this was having to do with apparently Julian Assange told Ellen Ratner something. Ellen Ratner is a Fox News correspondent whose brother Michael Ratner was a lawyer to WikiLeaks that, according to the official story, had jumped in front of a train. And then, Ratner was apparently saying that Seth Rich was the DNC source to WikiLeaks. Now, this is a persistent statement that has been injected into the alternative news sphere. Seth Rich has become, it's the JFK assassination of alt news. And I just have come to feel like any time there's some serious story coming up that the deep state, the powers that be, the Covington and Burlings, the people that we're talking about here don't want us to talk about, something about Seth Rich pops up. Do you know anything about this Ellen Ratner story and anything new happening with Julian Assange there in prison in England?
I don't know the Ratner story and Julian Assange. There's two sides of the coin. Either Trump is dumb as a bag of rocks and he's leaving Julian Assange to wither and deteriorate under the British deep state torture operations so they can lobotomize him so he can never be an asset to revealing this stuff, which exonerates Trump in many capacities. And Trump should know that the British are no ally or friend of the United States now. I mean, old Britain is gone. The new garbage heap that we see, sadly, in many regards, and the MI6 and MI5 and the entrapment of Papadopoulos and all of these Obama-era sources, they're obviously hostile to Trump. So Trump is either very stupid to allow Julian Assange to remain, or he's very smart and secretly has got him okay, either in a safe position or guarded, or maybe even over here. I won't say too much. I don't know too much, but he needs to have Julian Assange safe and brought over and testify about the Union Bank of Switzerland, Acosta, Brad Birkenfeld, Bennett, Snowden, Shellgame, because that is the real deep state financing operations. That nails Brennan. That nails all of these other people, because they did this in 2009 and it continued in 2012 and really quickened after 2012. Michael Isikoff comes into the picture because he interviewed me. Tom Hamburger of the Washington Post comes into the picture. He interviewed me. Michael Isikoff has been responsible for a lot of the propaganda stories regarding the Christopher Steele memo. So these are deep state CIA operatives. And Trump has to get his snipers and start picking these people off.
Political
snipers. In a legal
Yes.
sense, in a legal constitutional, yes, in a political sense, yes, not literal necessarily, despite the fun that might be. I think law and order and the prosecution and the court system is certainly superior. But he's got all the evidence. He's got the people. He's got the testimony. He just needs to pick a court date. We'll show up. We'll show up and we'll dump everything we have, and we've already given it to certain people. And I think that day is coming, and I think it's going to quicken over the next year before 2020. It's all there. Nothing's changed except the deep state has become more desperate to hide it. I remember talking with Michael Cohen, the president's attorney, and I also remember after that is when they came after Michael Cohen. They came after Michael Flynn. They fired him. Obama fired him after he got Brad's material and started putting this out on the DIA cables, about Saudi Arabia and Qatar financing terrorism. That was because of anybody else other than Brad Birkenfeld and the intelligence he brought. and the Moriartys too. Flynn knew about the Moriartys. So, Flynn is eventually going to be exonerated. Everything's going to be thrown out. He's not going to be pardoned because everything's going to fall out as fruit of the poisonous tree. Sidney Powell knows everything about this. General Flynn is going to be brought back into the Trump administration, and I think in a very powerful capacity is going to go after, like a rat terrier, all of these people, either as an inspector general czar, which we've talked about before, or as some high-level, political appointee, as well as Senator Dick Black, and as well as perhaps Tulsi Gabbard, as she is jettisoned from the Democrat Party. Her views will be more important to Trump to bring in so that he could facilitate a peeling away of the Democrat voters who do support her. There are a lot of very wealthy techies, for example. The CEO of Twitter has put a lot of money behind Tulsi Gabbard.
That doesn't make me like her more.
Very significant political opposition to Trump. No, it doesn't. But make your friends close and your enemies closer. So Trump needs to bring her closer to him. But I think all of this is going to be, he looks like Grover from the Muppet Show or Sesame Street or whatever the heck it is.
Well, Scott, let's talk for a minute about General Flynn. Right now,
yes,
the trial in Virginia is going on that we heard Judge Sullivan allude to at the Flynn sentencing that was stayed for months until Flynn was done cooperating with the government. It seemed to me in that Flynn hearing that they were essentially threatening his son. This is a trial of some of Michael Flynn's business associates in Flynn Intelligence, and of course now Sidney Powell has taken over. I know you're very close to this and can't reveal anything strategic, but Sidney has already challenged this, referring to Michael Flynn as an unindicted co-conspirator. She's really making headway, and I think this is a powerful turn. We really are in another chapter of all this after the Mueller probe shut down. Flynn fires Covington and Burling. He's now being represented by an honest, tough attorney. But yet Flynn knew about all this stuff related to you, knew about all this stuff related to the Moriartys. There are all these open questions that people have, even about political figures who we respect, admire, and believe are on our side. There's an inaction there that seems inexplicable to the average person and people watching us right now.
Well, we have one of the things that we always need to keep in our minds is that some of these senior level people in the military, the generals, the high level, political appointees, people that, you expect to be so smart and so, skilled and gifted. It's important to remember some of them are as dumb as a bag of rocks. They're totally drunk on their own narcissistic vainglory, the power intoxication of Washington, of walking in certain circles, and the notoriety and the glory and all of that artificiality. And they also are under the delusion of my country, right or wrong. I'm part of my country. The Justice Department is part of, our honorable Captain America spirit. And all of that is garbage and lies and self-delusion. So it doesn't surprise me, having gone through it. They do very stupid things. The Department of Justice does very stupid things because it's got stupid people. And the FBI, the CIA are prime examples. And Flynn has done some very stupid things as well. And all of that, adds a certain buffer or flexibility of why all of this has sort of just been stumbling and bumbling and half-witted and asinine. Now, the Flynn exoneration is coming because everything that was done to him was fruit of the poisonous tree, and the tree was planted by the false FISA warrant, which was planted by the Hillary Clinton Fusion GPS propaganda, funded and organized and orchestrated and coordinated and synthesized with the deep state, CIA, Brennan, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Director of National Intelligence, the State Department, the Department of Justice, the most important players and agencies in this whole weaponization of the intelligence community to spy on Trump to spy on Michael Cohen, to spy on Michael Flynn, to try and get Peter Strzok and Lisa Page to find a spy in the White House under Mike Pence's chief of staff. All of that was a weaponization designed to undermine Trump and remove him from office. That's a coup d'etat. That's a violation of the Constitution. That's a crime. But they were above this. The law didn't apply to them. They had endured 8 years of Obama, and now we're expecting Clinton. And when they didn't get it, they came apart at the seams. They wept like little girls at a Beatles concert, except they were dead stone cold in horror because Clinton didn't win. The mainstream media fell apart. That's another variable to consider, is the mental schizophrenic meltdown of the mainstream media. MSNBC, CNN, all of these asinine CIA Mockingbird assets have totally engaged in 2 years of lies, distortions, propaganda, half-truths, very skillfully polished, in a way that makes things almost feel true. And yet they're fundamentally false, and they're artificially designed to achieve an emotional excitement, to bully people. That's always what these liberal, fascist, Democrat media types do. They bully people and push people, threaten people. Well, if you don't believe this, you're a bigot. If you don't speak the black jive way, you're not a black voice. That's what we heard from the other Skiggsy Witch up there the other day. We don't need any black voices that aren't black, or brown voices that aren't brown. Well, what the hell does that mean? You have to speak with the education of a 2-year-old? You can't spell cat? You wear your pants down below your butt, and that makes you a black voice or a brown voice? What about the eloquent, articulate surgeons and doctors and CEOs from the Papa John's black guy who was the HUD director, and the Ben Carson, the brain surgeon? Are you going to call them not black voices because they have an elevated education, professional degree, that you're only going to take voices from some Skid Row, Ebonics, furious against white people and demanding reparations? Is that the black voice? Is that where we're trying to be pushed? Because we know how that ends. It ends in civil war, and the conservatives don't lose in that environment. That's what the liberal leftists and the antipatypes don't seem to understand. That's why I think they're falling apart into a mental degeneration, and they're going to kick off some sort of a flashpoint. They're going to pick a fight with the wrong journalist or group of people, and it's going to end in some real bloody ways, and it's going to be the antipatypes that are taken off the street in body bags.
Yeah.
So the Civil War and the problems in America are being accelerated by the media, the deep state, the liberals, the leftists, the Democrats. And what the response by Republicans has not been noble. I mean, they look at McConnell, and I don't like any of these people. McConnell, and the only ones I have respect for, Rand Paul. He seems to be the only one with the brain, the only one with the constitutional art. But some of the other Republicans, for example, the House just voted to end the authorization for military force. Now, Jason, that's something I support. I don't like the authorization for military force.
What does that mean?
I don't like
you mean the president having the ability
to
war? The president just having the ability to snap his fingers and create a military incursion?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
They should have gotten rid of that under George W.
War is a game.
Yeah, if they had gotten rid of it under George W., we'd be...
he was the SOB.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Scott, we're almost out of time for today.
Brought it in. That was part of the 9/11. That was all part of the 9/11 plan.
Right. We're almost out of time for today, Scott. And I forgot to mention at the top of the show, we've been on BitChute for some time. So in addition to YouTube and Periscope and Facebook and DLive and Patreon and Subscribestar and all of the other platforms, VK.com. Now, Crowdsource the Truth is on BitChute, and it's been set up so that all the videos automatically go from YouTube to BitChute. So for people who didn't catch this live, you can see it on BitChute. People who don't want to support Google-owned behemoths like YouTube. You can see us on BitChute. And of course, Crowdsource the Truth is a viewer-supported news resource. So if you're watching the show and you enjoy the show, please go to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth or subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. And if you're watching us on one of those channels right now, it's very important that you also visit Scott's page, which is over here at patreon.com/shellgame, and sponsor Scott on Patreon so he can keep bringing us these insights, this really important information. People can also pick up a copy of Scott's book, Shell Game, by going to shellgamewhistleblower.com. You can read a lot about Scott and purchase the book. Scott, I want to thank you for joining me again today. Anything you want to say before we wrap up for today?
Well, you're doing a great job, Jason. I admire you, and I'm glad America has you speaking out. You're one of the few voices. So I think things are going to get exciting very quickly in the next year, and I think we're in the driver's seat. So keep chugging away.
Thank you, Scott, and thanks for joining me today. Thanks for watching, everybody. Tonight at 7 o'clock Eastern, we've got another episode of the Intelligence Assessment with Kevin Shipp. We've been trying to do this round table to help understand some of the discrepancies in reporting on Dennis Montgomery's The Hammer, and doors keep slamming in our face. Kevin and I will address this tonight, some new information coming to light. See everybody at 7 o'clock Eastern. Thank you, Scott. Thanks, everybody, for watching. See you later.